why bird brains are more brilliant than anyone suspected.
All right, bird
Although
brains.
bird brains are tiny, they're packed with neurons, especially in areas responsible for higher level thinking.
Hmm.
Two studies published last month in Science explore the structure and function of avian brains, revealing that they are organized similar to mammals and are capable of conscious thought. There you go. You were talking about conscious thought, and people. There you go. I I mean birds, I mean especially with their mating ability, like where it's so the mating dance, the courtship dances, I think what is it, ravens or crows have been shown that they can use tools. I mean there's a lot going on there that I think we've taken for granted for a really long time.
Yeah.
All right, let's watch this video.
Bird brains are tiny. The common pigeon's is about the size of a peanut. But having smaller noggins doesn't mean birds are unintelligent. One way scientists estimate brain power is through the number of neurons present. Some birds have upwards of 1 to 2 billion, similar
Wow.
to monkeys. The intelligence of birds, from New
That's
Zealand
right. It's not the
parrots that
size of the brain that
understand
matters. It's
probability
how many neurons.
to ravens that can plan for the future.
Yeah, I just want to it reminded me like the cool things that can happen. I mean, the way that pigeons can, you know, they actually still to this day have pigeon racing, that where
Mhm.
you basically train them to go back to a spot,
Yeah.
and then you
Oh yeah.
fly them like 50 100 miles away, and
Mhm.
then you release them all together, and then the first pigeon that like comes back to the spot that it's supposed to like wins. And it's
Yeah.
like it's still unknown to science like how they're able to do that. We think that they're like looking at magnetic waves and that kind of thing. Like we really still have no idea. I mean, even for how small their brains are, they're still capable of insanely complicated things that we have no idea about.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, man. Even when you look at a bird, like thinking about how a bird flies and how we can't even mimic that with planes yet, it's
Yeah.
quite
Yeah,
amazing
exactly.
the engineering that nature has done.
Exactly.
Isn't a surprise to researchers who have long seen their capabilities. Early models proposed that only a small region of bird brains was responsible for complex behaviors, but this has been revised in recent
Whoops,
years.
got that one wrong. Way wrong.
Still, the detailed internal organization of bird brains hadn't been explored until now. Two new studies in Science dig into their structure and function, revealing even greater similarities to mammalian brains. Researchers shine different angles of light into extremely thin slices of the pallium, the area of the bird brain with a similar function to the neocortex of mammals. This allowed them to see a 3D view of the fibers that connect neurons. The fibers of owls and pigeons were organized much like those of mammals. Parallel fibers along the pallium were crosscut by perpendicular fibers between layers, forming columns of connection. These microcircuits could explain how birds are capable of complex behaviors, like newly discovered conscious experiences. Researchers tested whether crows are aware of what they see and do. First, they trained two crows to indicate whether they saw a faint light, a dark gray dot on a black background. After they flashed the dot and showed the rule for that round, which varied to prevent the birds from preparing their responses, they asked the crows to report what they saw. Because the dot was hard to make out from the background, the crows sometimes failed to report accurately. Instead, they had to decide whether they perceived a dot or not. Researchers
Wow.
inserted electrodes into the crows' brains to monitor how hundreds of neurons responded during this exercise. When the crows indicated that they saw a stimulus, hundreds of neurons fired before they made their selection. Those same neurons were silent when the birds demonstrated that they didn't see the faint dot. This response shows that the activity of birds represents more than what they see, adding them to the
Wow.
animals capable of conscious thought. Although the most recent common
Wow, I didn't
ancestor
know that was like the defining line on consciousness, whether or not the things that you see. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
of birds and mammals was alive about 320 million years ago, both these
Very
studies
cool.
show
I,
striking
I would love to see
similarities
how
between
they
their brain
actually train those
capabilities.
birds to give them the response.
I know, right? That's so
yeah.
insane.
Kind of intense.
The red and the blue. I got a
Yeah.
question from chat. Do you have any thoughts about the energy efficiency of the brain? basically talking about that brains might only use 20% of their total energy when your body is at rest. I mean, that's tough to say. I'm not a neurologist. Hard to say. I think
No.
I mean, I've heard that the whole thing, like only use like 10 to 20% of our brains is kind of like an old trope that isn't really real anymore.
Yeah.
Like we kind of like are using all of our brains, but like all the neurons aren't like all technically firing at the same time, kind of thing.
Right.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah, but the brains definitely are a pretty giant energy sink. I mean, there takes a lot of glucose to keep that thing running.
right. And I mean, all the neurons and everything. Or isn't it like we have more neurons in our brains than stars in the galaxy or something like that? Crazy.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Isn't that insane? It's like
Yeah.
what? Um,
Yeah, that's amazing.
it doesn't. I mean, it really goes in. I think this paper and this idea is like it's not surprising to me that birds have this higher level of thought, especially when you think of something called referential communication. And referential communication is the ability to have a basically like a dance or a gesture that actually symbolizes something that you're referring to, right? So this,
Mhm.
and for example, one of the best taught examples of this is the wiggle dance with bees, where they're going to go out, they're going to find the flower, and then they're going to come back to the nest, and then they basically wiggle in the direction of the nectar source, and how far back and left and right they like wiggle, and then how far they wiggle is indicative of exactly where that flower is. So if
Yeah.
bees are capable of referential communication, you know,
Right.
I mean it's right.
Pretty cool.
So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. One of the things that I really hope we see in our lifetime, man, is that we actually develop a kind of neural, electrical interface where, we can have a computer kind of decipher what it is that, different brains are thinking and feeling and experiencing. That would be just truly fantastic.
yeah, I mean the Neuralink, right? That's what I mean. I think that's the idea to try to. That'd be so cool. Because
Yeah,
you
because at
could.
the end of the day, the signals that our brain is experiencing are, in essence, electrical signals
Mhm.
when you think about them. So I'm sure there's a lot of complex programming in our biological systems, but um, I would love to have that before we die.
I mean, that's the. I mean, all we are and all our personality is basically a series of neurotransmitter ratios in our brain, right? That's the. What's his name? The futurist, like Krasowski? I forget what his name is. It's the singularity hypothesis. As soon as humans are able to discover that, how we can replicate the neurotransmitter ratios in our brain, we can actually replicate that. And once we can replicate that in a computer, then we could live forever. So that's what the singularity is. Basically, you're trying to live until your brain can be uploaded into the computer, and then your personality, exactly who you are right now, could just be uh, going forever within inside of a
I
computer.
saw a Black Mirror episode about that. It was pretty creepy.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
what's crazy about that thought is like, we experience the world and we, for example, we feel good, when we experience something, or someone who like, does some drug that feels a rush of whatever it is, right? Like, can you mimic that for a computer to have some type of positive reinforcement? We could even delve deep into that whole like AI world here where, can you get a computer to feel good about certain responses? This just kind of trippy to think that, man. Like, just imagine being in your Tesla, and if your Tesla drives good, you can give it a treat.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But if you can make it feel good, you can make it feel bad too. So there's all kinds of like ethical stuff.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that kind of gets into the whole thing with like robots and how are you like the ethical idea of, I mean, consciousness with robots, right? I mean, what are we?
Hmm.
And I mean, if that's what we're gonna be looking at and the moral questions that we're thinking about there, I mean, how we're just gonna look like absolute savages that we aren't taking better care of like the mammal species, the ones that like just what is it, 200 miles away, the dolphin species that's going extinct right now, and the um, Baja Sea because they're being overfished. It's like
Hmm.
they're just something with a V. I forget what they're called. Um, it's just an interesting idea. I do worry. I do worry that like we as humans like might get too wrapped up in this idea of AI and like this that's it. We don't need the Earth anymore, and you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because like right now we've already see ourselves as outside of nature. I think we are like kind of like on top of it as opposed to living with it. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have in the pollution that we have with the economic crisis that we're causing. The because I mean, how many people know about the mass extinction that's going on right now, led by humans?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the crazy thought too when you think about AI and like how you can give it directives. And, we as humans kind of interestingly enough know what we need to do, but then we impulsively don't do it. Um, so you almost ask yourself, what is it that, humankind or really any species, what are we programmed to actually do? And it almost feels sometimes like our core directive is to repopulate, or not repopulate, but to regenerate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And, you really ask, when you program an AI at that point, this becomes a much deeper conversation at some point, but when you program an AI, what is its core directive that you will ultimately give it to do? Will it be save the planet? In which case,
Mm-hmm.
probably have to go Thanos on us and slaughter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I mean,
because
that's
we're the ones that are killing it.
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, that's kind of like the interesting hypothesis that Dawkins postulated too, the selfish gene theory, that
Yeah.
are the genes within an organism are pushing that organism to evolve over time, get breed with more diverse organisms to increase mutations and all that kind of stuff. It's like the genes are the ones that are the actual driving factor. So once we
Yeah.
kind of like give that over to, I wonder what the I was just looking at this, the evolutionary substrate. I was thinking about this and looking at this, the singularity Wikipedia, where you have abiogenesis, DNA, RNA. DNA, I guess, would be that selfish gene theory, right? And then now it's the cells, human evolution into our brains. And then now with semiconducting and the internet, we have a digital kind of evolutionary substrate, and then a biodigital fusion, which is that singularity that I was talking about before.
Yeah.
So,
It's just crazy to think how primitive when you think about humans and the planet, right?
mm-hmm.
And you and I grow, cultures of whatever micro in a flask or in a fermenter. You kind of witness the kind of lag, log phase growth and stationary phase,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at the human population, and it just mimics that almost exactly. To
Mm-hmm.
last culture that's going to run out of nutrients, and then
Yeah.
bad things happen.
Yeah,
So,
that's a great point. I mean, we're not outside of our nature. I mean, I think, social Darwinism and stuff like that is kind of overblown. I think one of the biggest things about humans is that we're, hopefully able to rise above that, right? Where we can rise above our environments and we can think outside of nutrient needs and like try to plan out scenarios. But I think that the problem is that with the environment collapsing around us, we only have fewer and fewer resources now and we're kind of pushing ourselves in a harder and harder position to recover from, to just make decisions from. Uh, yeah, so it is really scary, I think. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this content, please subscribe to be notified of our latest live streams where we have scientific debates, informative conversations about issues, and follow the latest advances in science. If you want to join a thoughtful, non-toxic community where we have good discussions about science and other issues, please join the Discord. The link's in the description. Thanks again.